Nathan Kessler boarded the plane in Dallas heading to Tampa. The first-class cabin smelled like leather and expensive perfume. People were putting away designer bags and checking expensive watches. Nathan barely looked up from his phone as he dropped into his window seat, 3A. He had the confident look of a successful businessman who was used to people laughing at his jokes even when they weren't funny. Before the plane even took off, Nathan ordered a scotch and loosened his tie. He wanted everyone to know he belonged in first class. The flight would take almost 3 hours. Plenty of time to enjoy premium drinks and look around at the other passengers. That's when he noticed a blonde woman sitting a few rows ahead. She looked familiar, but he couldn't quite place her. Maybe she was a news anchor or a minor celebrity whose fame was fading. Nathan smirked and nudged the quiet man sitting next to him. "Ever notice how some people think money can buy class?" he said, speaking just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. The man gave a polite laugh but kept reading his magazine. He clearly wasn't interested in talking, but Nathan didn't need someone to respond to keep going. "She looks familiar," Nathan continued, nodding toward the blonde woman. "Probably some reality TV reject. You know the type. Big hair, expensive handbag, and no idea how to blend in." His words floated through the cabin, and a few people glanced his way, but the woman kept focusing on her iPad. This bothered Nathan. He thought women like her should care what men like him thought about them. As the plane began moving, the flight attendant checked everyone's seatbelts and collected empty glasses. Nathan stretched in his seat, already bored. He watched the blonde woman politely hand her drink to the attendant with a calm smile. Her quiet confidence irritated him even more. "She must have married well," Nathan said loudly enough to be heard. "That's usually how these stories go. Third husband, maybe fourth. Plastic surgeons on speed dial. It's always the same." The atmosphere in the cabin shifted. A businessman across the aisle gave Nathan a disapproving look. The flight attendant hesitated as she walked past. Even the man next to Nathan sighed quietly, wishing he could be anywhere else. But Nathan didn't notice or didn't care. Once the plane reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign turned off, Nathan flagged down the flight attendant with an exaggerated wave. "Another scotch," he said, handing over his empty glass. Then, trying to get a reaction from the blonde woman, he added, "And whatever she's having too, on me." But the flight attendant simply replied, "She's fine, sir," and moved away before Nathan could say more. This annoyed him further. He turned back to his unwilling seatmate, who had opened a book to avoid conversation. "You ever notice," Nathan said, tapping the armrest between them, "how some people walk around like they're the main character in life? Like the rest of us are just extras in their little movie?" The man glanced up briefly before returning to his book. "Haven't really thought about it," he mumbled. Nathan wouldn't let it go. "I'll tell you exactly who she is," he continued, his voice carefully pitched to Carrie without seeming too loud. "She's the kind of woman who gets by on her last name, on favors. Some senator's ex-wife, maybe, or one of those lawyers who loves the camera but couldn't win a case to save her life." He waited for a reaction from the woman, but she remained calm, scrolling through her tablet as if she didn't even know he existed. This made Nathan even more irritated. "Guess she's too important for the rest of us," he muttered. A few rows back, a woman in a navy suit exchanged knowing looks with her seatmate. An older gentleman raised his eyebrow as he looked up from his newspaper. People were noticing Nathan's behavior now, but in his arrogance, he thought they agreed with him. "Mark my words," Nathan said, leaning forward and speaking in a slightly lower voice. "She's going to post something later about how exhausting travel is, probably complain about manspreading or some nonsense. Women like her love playing the victim, but I guarantee you—" "Excuse me, sir," a calm, firm voice interrupted him. Nathan turned to find the blonde woman looking directly at him. Her expression wasn't angry or upset. It was simply unreadable. She studied him for a moment, gave a faint smile that told him nothing, then turned back to her tablet. For the first time in a long time, Nathan felt uncomfortable. There was something about that look she gave him. Not dismissive, not irritated, but knowing. It was as if she had seen hundreds of men like him before and had decided he wasn't worth her time. The flight attendant returned with his drink. Nathan noticed she didn't chat with him or smile like before. Had she heard everything he said? He took a slow sip of his scotch, the ice clinking against the glass, and glanced at the woman again. Her name tag read Pam, but that didn't help him place her. She was still reading, still unbothered by his presence. Nathan couldn't stand being ignored. "Pam," he said directly to her, making sure others could still hear. "You don't look like a Pam." She didn't answer. Nathan felt a twist in his stomach but continued. "No offense, it's just, I don't know, you look more like a Kelly or a Lauren. Pam sounds like someone's mom." Still no response. Nathan realized she wasn't just ignoring him, she was letting him embarrass himself. He noticed other passengers were watching him now, not with amusement, but with judgment. The realization made his stomach tighten. They weren't laughing with him. Nathan finished his scotch and set the glass down harder than necessary. Then the flight attendant approached the woman and said, "Ms. Bondi, would you like another beverage?" The woman, Pam, politely declined, but Nathan barely heard her response. His mind was racing. Bondi. Pam Bondi. Now it made sense. Former Attorney General of Florida, nationally known, politically connected, a legal powerhouse who had gone head-to-head with some of the most powerful people in the country. A woman who had been on television not because she was seeking fame, but because she was the kind of person who could ruin someone's life with a single phone call. Nathan's throat went dry. He stole another glance at her, but she wasn't looking at him. She didn't need to. She already knew exactly who he was and what kind of man he had shown himself to be. I thought you looked familiar," Nathan said, forcing a smile. "Didn't realize I was in the presence of Florida royalty." Pam didn't react. She didn't turn. She didn't speak. She just continued reading her tablet as if he were nothing more than background noise. This was worse than if she had confronted him. If she had argued back, he could have played it off as a joke. But her deliberate choice to ignore him left him drowning in his own embarrassment. "I actually followed some of your cases back in the day," he tried again. "You've had quite the career." Still nothing. No glance. No acknowledgement. When the flight attendant returned to ask if he wanted another drink, Nathan hesitated. "Just water," he muttered. As the flight attendant took his empty glass, he noticed the tiniest flicker of amusement in Pam Bondi's eyes. She hadn't turned her head or spoken, but in that split second, he knew she had been aware of everything. She had been waiting and watching, and now she was enjoying his discomfort. For the rest of the flight, Nathan sat quietly, the weight of his own words pressing down on him. He had spent years walking into rooms like he owned them, speaking as if his opinion mattered more than anyone else's. But here, trapped at 35,000 feet with nowhere to escape, he wasn't the powerful one. He wasn't in control. As the plane began its descent into Tampa, Nathan stared out the window at the vast sky. For years, he had carried himself like the center of the universe. People laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny. They nodded when he spoke, even when he had nothing important to say. But today he had been reminded that respect isn't about money or power or being the loudest in the room. It's about character. Pam Bondi hadn't needed to put him in his place. She had let his own arrogance do that for her. As Nathan took another sip of water, he realized this wasn't about her. It was about the kind of man he wanted to be going forward. How often do we judge people before we even know who they are? How many times do we let our arrogance blind us to the truth? Maybe the real lesson wasn't about power or status. Maybe it was about learning to treat everyone with respect before we regret our words and actions. As the plane touched down in Tampa, Nathan wondered if perhaps it was time for him to start listening more and talking less.